Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app. This series is brought to you by SuperGuardian, a specialist self-managed super fund administrator known for their client-centric approach to their full service solution. If you need SMSF support or CPD, check out the Knowledge Centre or sign up for SuperGuardian updates at superguardian.com.au. Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and today we are rounding out our self-managed super fund series, and I'm joined by Tim Miller, the Head of Education from SuperGuardian. G'day, Tim.
G'day, Fraser. How are you going there?
Very, very well, thank you. Thank you for asking. It's a beautiful morning, so I can't complain. Tell us about SuperGuardian. Just we might start there. I think. What do you do there?
Yeah, so my role at SuperGuardian is head of education. So it's a fairly broad role. I was brought into the business to, I guess, expand the services that we offer. We've been providing self-managed super fund administration for over 18 years, and so sizable administration business, and my role was really to provide that additional service, the operation of providing education for not only our advisor network but also our trustee network and internally as well. So yeah, it's really a broad role where I'm there to play the middle person between the regulators and the law and the outside world, and how that all sits strategically in elements of education.
Fantastic, and more importantly, you get to talk to people all day.
I do, yeah, and most people in my life will tell me that I'm not shy in having a word or two to say.
Oh, you sound just like all the advisors listening.
Excellent.
Except you don't have to do statements of advice on whenever you provide some information. So,
that's right.
Yeah, lucky. So tell us your story. Where did this all begin for you?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting story, and we're talking superannuation and using the word interesting in the same sentence.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
come on,
yeah.
we're all nerds.
But look, my story started. I'm always hesitant to go too far back, but that's more the dark cloak of mystery. But I did start out as a youth trainee in the Australian Taxation Office, and the whole thing about working in the ATO is that I wanted to do everything except tax when I worked in there. And so in about 1994, just shortly after Super Guarantee was introduced in the 92-93 year, the ATO went on this sort of expansive introduction of the superannuation business line, and I jumped sort of both feet in, thinking, well, super's not tax; it's something a little bit new. And so I spent 4 hours a day every day for 4 years on the phone talking to people about their employer and employee obligations and everything super, and then the opportunity arose through a colleague of mine to get into the space of what was back in the time a thing called excluded superannuation funds, and so I thought, well, this sounds interesting. So I made my way into the private sector and jumped on board into excluded funds, and then started the journey pretty much that year with what became self-managed super funds. So really got the opportunity to grow with this industry and provide support to advisors and trustees in that space basically since day one.
Fantastic. And you've been very lucky in the fact that nothing's changed since then.
No, it's been a pretty smooth ride. 2.5-3% super guarantee, and one set of rules about benefit payments and contributions. So it's been a pretty cruisy 20 odd years.
Oh my goodness, hasn't it been a roller coaster? So tell us about that journey. So as you've come through, obviously, a big part of your job is not just teaching; it's learning along the way,
correct,
and working stuff out, and working out every time the legislation changes and. What does that actually mean for everybody, and how's it going to work?
Yeah, and look, and I think that's always been the interesting thing, and probably the one lesson not the one lesson I learned from being part of the tax office, but being in there and being at the coalface every day of the questions that are being asked. It's more about I think the first thing's always been about interpreting the question. So before you can interpret the law, you've got to be able to interpret the question, because people have this uncanny knack of asking questions to get the answer that they want to get. And so one of my great lessons on the super helpline back in the day was people would ring up and they'd want you to say yes to whatever they were asking you. And when you said no, they were quite disappointed, and so they generally would ring back a couple of minutes later, hoping to get somebody else. And so you'd have to tell them that you're on a 4-hour shift, and so it was probably worthwhile them going away and doing something else. So the whole purpose of interpreting the law sort of starts at that question point, and then really, I guess, delving deep into things like the exciting parts, explanatory memorandums, and other sort of documentation, policy documents that lead up to it. And so for me, that was the first process, and then finding peers and others within the industry who you can have good, frank discussions with about matters, and not be afraid to be wrong in your interpretation of stuff, to be able to get a good grounding, to be able to at least have conversations with people, and also then importantly sort of tell people that they can and can't do certain things. So the learning part as an educator, the learning part is ongoing, and I'm still learning to this day. As we'll talk about, no doubt, with all the reform stuff with superannuation. It's really just a matter of taking on board, certainly, what does the government release first, then what's other people's opinions, and how do those two things match up, and then ultimately what does the regulator say, because they're the final set of eyes that have to be cast over things, and so you want to at least as much as possible agree with the regulator.
Yeah, so it's certainly interesting, isn't it? Well, now, as you say that, and I'm thinking to myself, the law's black and white. It's written down. There's some explanations there. Surely there could be no debate over this. But you're absolutely right when it comes to a lot of these issues. It's about understanding and having those open debates with colleagues and other people around to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting, and I know in the series you had some discussions with ASF audits, and my relationship with ASF audits goes back 20 years, and I can certainly say that most of those conversations in the early days were not just about an administrator and an auditor agreeing with on things, because largely we disagreed on pretty much everything, which is the purpose in many respects of the auditor, and my original go-to argument was always, it's not what the law says, it's what the law doesn't say, and I think particularly with the legislation is the legislation will often tell you what you're prohibited from doing, or they'll set the parameters around what applies, but then everything in between Section 1 and Section 300 or whatever sort of provides some form of scope to be different, and so grey is obviously the favourite colour of all SMSF educators, because that's the ultimate world that we live in.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of any legislation that comes out, isn't it? That the fact that often the guidance is, don't do this and don't do that. Not yep. Here is best practice. Go and do that, and then. Yeah,
and look, and I think that's the key. The classic one, I think, in the SMSF space is, the contribution rules. They're the same for whether you're contribute to an industry fund, a retail fund, self-managed super fund. All those sorts of things are the same. The investment rules are really where the SMSF space comes into its own, and that's where there's the guidelines are you've got to have an investment strategy. But it doesn't tell you what you've got to have in that investment strategy, and the ATO's position has always been and hasn't changed in this space, that it's your fund, and so as trustees you ultimately control it, subject to sole purpose test and other sorts of key issues. So there's a huge amount of room to manoeuvre within the, you've got to have a strategy to provide for your retirement, but we're not going to tell you what that strategy is. You have to work it out for yourself. But here's some guidelines about what you definitely can't do. And so everything else beyond that is either black and white, like listed securities and a few things like that, or, slightly questionable when you start to talk about what is business real property, what are the rules around limited recourse borrowing arrangements, how can you invest in related entities and all those sorts of other things, and who is a related entity. All these areas, they take you down a path like the classic rabbit hole, and you don't know where you're going to come out.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, obviously, having working in a regulator has its benefits. When you look back and understanding how regulators work from the inside out, not just from the outside in, I think we're often guilty of just looking at regulators from the outside as a big logo, or the ATO, it's a big logo, or ASIC is a big logo, and not really thinking about what happens on the inside. How does that help with your career?
Well, look, I mean, to be fair, in some of my presentations that I do, I may go a little harsh on the tax office from a regulatory point of view, and that's often comes back to say their interpretation versus mine and others within the industry, and that's the beauty of interpretation, is that not everybody's is the same. But one of my messages that has been really clear for many years is that we're very quick to highlight the deficiencies in the ATO reporting of certain information, but very very casually ignore the fact that often it's us doing the reporting, and so it's an element of what I would suspect and what I often call garbage in, garbage out. And so if you're reporting processes and means are not up to scratch, then the information on the other end is generally going to be, also not up to scratch. Now, along the journey, there's no doubt that the regulator has had some relatively terrible systems, so certain elements don't report that well. But I think, like the rest of us, they've evolved in that space, and we can all be quite critical of things like MyGov and other systems that the ATO particularly use, but as they have evolved, the capacity for us to report on total superannuation balance and all those sorts of elements, it may not still be in our ideal world, but it's certainly leaps and bounds on having to write to the regulator and get a list of stuff reported out to you, and it would take X number of months and things to do. Just the timing of those sorts of things can improve in time. So I still apply the garbage in, garbage out sort of process, in that whatever we're reporting in, if we're not reporting correctly to the regulator, then we can't expect them to report correctly back to us, albeit that there are areas they can lift their game in.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, the technology and the software is one thing, and if the systems don't allow it, then they don't allow it, and we need to wait till systems catch up, because often that can be a long wait. But they're also just human beings, right? Inside these organisations, and it's in a difficult situation, and as you would imagine, we're spending 4 hours on the phone talking to somebody. As a regulator, if they're going to be starting to abuse you, then you're not exactly going to enjoy the conversation or want to give them some lenience.
No, that's right. And look, I liken it a little bit. I'm a dad, and I've been a coach of my son's sporting teams, and I liken it to umpires of junior football and even sports for adults or whatever, where ultimately whenever the umpire makes a decision, 50% of people disagree, and that's because the decision's gone against them. So if you apply that in the SMSF space, well, the ATO are ultimately the umpire, and they're the umpire between Treasury and the end user, being the SMSF trustees in this instance, but advisors and accountants and that as well. And so you've got a piece of law written by policymakers with and when I say a piece of law, lots of pieces of law that are occasionally changing, written by policymakers who then can wipe their hands of it. They've done their job. You've then got the end users that are trying to interpret that law and trying to apply it to their own set of circumstances. and then you have this group in the middle who ultimately have to make an assessment of whatever decisions you make as the end user to make sure they are in line with the intention of that piece of law. And so there is always going to be disagreement, and there's always going to be problems in that place. But yeah, it's the concept that absolutely they're all human. I've even met a few of them, so I can personally attest to that. And they're just trying to do their job, ultimately with almost the same amount of information that you have with regards to interpreting that information, perhaps with higher capacity to engage the legal fraternity from the commissioner's point of view. But that's possibly where it ends as far as additional powers.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good analogy, just to treat the regulators like they're the referee on the field, and you've got to treat them as human beings and with respect. And obviously, when it comes to the policymakers, their job is to write policy that favours more people than not favours people, and keep it reasonably fair, because for all the different systems, as you said, the government has to collect tax.
Yeah.
To run the country. If it doesn't, then guess what? We don't run the country. So
that's correct.
I guess it's about making sure that more people. Obviously, there's going to be losers. Every single piece of legislation, there's winners and losers, and the idea is just have more winners and losers, right?
Yeah, correct. And that is the superannuation conundrum, isn't it? Is probably, I think. And it's come up recently with some of the legislation that was enacted sort of just prior to the end of June, which was in regards to contribution changes, but also the definition of a self-managed superannuation fund. And we might talk about that stuff a little bit later. But when you read through the conversation that's going on inside Parliament when they're talking about these sorts of things, it is very much that there are winners and losers, and it is very much about, this does benefit this core group of people, and it's ultimately not necessarily anti these other ones, but they're not going to benefit from it, and so it's finding the balance. And one of the things that was raised, and it probably won't get too much coverage, I wouldn't suspect, in the broader sort of sense of the industry, but one of the pieces of legislation that went through when they're talking about the whole Your Future, Your Super stuff, and they're talking about the definition of self-managed super and the changes to the bring forward rules and other contribution rules, is they said, if we want to pass this legislation, shouldn't we actually go back to the concept that we don't have an objective of superannuation or an objective for superannuation? We tried and failed to introduce a one-liner of what is the objective of super. It was proposed as an amendment and was scrapped pretty much straight away. So, really difficult to I guess, continue to pursue the purpose of super if you don't have an objective for it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the North Star, isn't it? Like the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
You kind of need to start with a purpose. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
So tell us about what your passion, why self-managed super fund?
Look, I think ultimately my passion's driven by, and I did a presentation once for a group of self-managed super fund trustees, and the advice group that got me up to present said, Tim, give us your bio, and I wrote something down for them, and one of the sentences, it's always stuck with me, one of my sentences was, Tim enjoys nothing more than educating self-managed super fund trustees, and the director of this business has got up and said, we're really happy to have Tim here. Bit of a sad indictment of his life that he loves nothing more than educating self-managed super fund trustees, but I think that for me was, it was certainly a moment where I changed my bio shortly after that. But I think the message was clear at that point in time that whilst we talk about the tax office being a regulator with regards to the interpretation of the law, I really my passions, it stems from making sure that those people that are ultimately engage in this industry, which is the trustees of self-managed superannuation funds, the mums and dads, that they have that, not necessarily the voice, but they at least have have people that can help them interpret what potentially their advisors, their accountants, and that are talking about in this regard, but also ensuring that, and I've done a lot of accreditation courses under the old sort of prior to FASIA and that, the old RG146 requirements. I used to do courses on effectively a monthly basis for advisors wanting that qualification. And so my passion's always really been about, if you want to be in this space, it is a specialist area as a broader part of the superannuation industry. You really need to have the knowledge to be able to talk to trustees, and then your trustees need to have a broad sense of knowledge. One, because they're signing a declaration that says they have that knowledge, but two, because you want them to understand the strategies that you're actually explaining to them, so they can determine whether it does benefit them or not. So I sort of see myself as having this singular objective of making sure that everybody is entitled to and gets the same level of education that is available for the richest SMSF, well, then the poorest superannuation member deserves that same amount of information.
Well, fantastic. What I heard you say then was that you just love helping people, and because you know so much about this stuff, it's an easy way for you to help them.
Yeah, that would probably be a pretty good summary.
Fantastic. So tell us about your job then. What's your day-to-day job involve?
So my day-to-day job is ultimately about, I guess, gathering information. So, for example, over the last 6 months, we've had two federal budgets, or just over 6 months, we've had two federal budgets. We're 4 years into super reform that seems to be never ending, and so my day-to-day job is about interpreting what we currently know. So, we at SuperGuardian, we have a significant client base, and they have questions, and they want to know whether or not they can undertake certain transactions. Now, we don't advise on what a fund should or shouldn't do. We provide support on, from a compliance point of view, what is and isn't possible, and then they need to go and seek that advice piece. So on a day-to-day basis, I've got the daily administrative compliance issues to consider, and conversations often involving auditors and other parties. Then there is a large part of my time spent on researching my next subject of choice. So, I run, as a minimum, I run monthly webinars, but I'm also writing regular content for articles. So I do monthly articles for a number of advice groups out there. I write articles for trade magazines, and I also do technical updates for our client base as well. So it's about trying to gather information. It's about trying to determine what's topical. So it's about researching those elements, and also taking some risks, and not just writing about what the new rules are. It's about potentially giving a little bit of an opinion about whether those rules are right or wrong, indifferent, what it might be. So a lot of research, a lot of conversations with others. I spend a reasonable amount of time talking to my peers within the industry, just to get their position on certain issues as well, because none of us are the super oracle as such, and so we all have different opinions. And then ultimately it's about putting all that research into a presentation, into a paper, into a bulletin or an article, and making sure you're getting the right message across. So that's a day in the life.
Fantastic. So I see then that self-managed super funds are kind of a team sport, and you then become the coach or the captain of that team, because obviously like you said, you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with administrators, you're dealing with auditors, you're dealing with advisors, accountants, and all different aspects. Yeah,
absolutely. And if our sporting analogy is that I'm the head coach, then it's about having the right level of assistance around you. You need the defensive coach and the attacking coach and that as well, and others that can help sort of in many respects reined me in, because given the microphone and a stage, once you put me there, then it's harder to stop me. But in the build up to all of that, we can talk about the parameters around, what message we're trying to get across, and so always
Fantastic.
happy to work.
So you're used to having 4-hour conversations. Great. So let's look at that then. If it is a team of people, we call it self-managed, which kind of indicates that it's a small thing, as in one person or a couple of directors managing this fund. But maybe the term self-managed super fund is something that might need to be considered.
Yeah, well, I don't think they've ever got the term right, because it's when we started out in this industry and they called it do-it-yourself super, and nobody did it themselves, and anyone that tried to do it themselves generally, I wouldn't want to cast aspersions, but most people didn't do it right, and that's in the sense that you've got lodgement obligations, you've got other sorts of areas, and so I think the best way I like to define self-managed is that you are, as trustees, you're the manager of a broader team of people that is looking after your fund, and so it's bringing that concept back, and probably the most loosely used term of what is the number one benefit of having a self-managed superannuation fund. If you ask that question over the last 20 years, the answer will always come back with control. But the anomaly is that you don't have control necessarily, because you are engaging with potentially a financial advisor, with an auditor, with potentially an actuary, with investment managers. So you are managing that group of professionals to help you achieve your objectives, and often those groups are involved in determining what those objectives are as well. And so the concept of control is a really strong one in that the real benefit of controlling the fund is that you have the ultimate say in what you're doing. So from a timing point of view, you can control when you buy and sell investments. So therefore you can control ultimately to a certain degree when you lodge your fund. So if you operate through a fund administrator like ourselves, then they obviously have their own lodgement programs. But ultimately, the provision of information, the way that data flows through to the administrators will help in the timing of those issues. So control is a loose concept, but ultimately it's a management concept, and that's the link to self-managed. But yeah, to find the appropriate name is a difficult one.
Yeah, has there been anything else put forward?
Look, no, not officially. I always see all of these other sorts of names out there of people promoting, the new style superannuation fund, which are just sort of fancy names for self-managed funds. But, whether you talk about the like the family fund and all those sorts of things, well, that concept can't be correct, because there can be people that are other than the family members inside of the fund. So, I think ultimately the legislation's got it right when they talk about funds with fewer than, and of course we're now talking about funds with fewer than 7 members or funds with up to 6 members. But when they talk about the small superannuation fund, that obviously pretty much defines what it is. It's a small fund. It's a fund with less than a certain number of members. But it's probably more a self-directed superannuation fund than a self-managed superannuation fund. But I think self-managed sounds a little bit more exciting.
It's in the name, and it's sort of one of those things, isn't it? Changing the name doesn't actually change most of the outcomes.
No, that's right.
But you mentioned control. That a lot of people feel that it's control is the thing, but that's quite a loose term. Well, in your opinion, what's the big benefit then?
The big benefit of self-managed super?
Yeah, over normal.
Well, I think the big benefit is, I guess, trying to put that into a term. broadness of choice, I think, is probably more the benefit of it. So choice is also as broad a word as control, but you've got investment choice. So arguably you can say, well, with the other funds within the sector, you've also got choice of investment strategy, but they have to be a little bit more streamlined with what their strategies actually are, and you've got professional fund managers sitting in behind them, so they're not necessarily going to look at such things as cryptocurrencies, residential property, artwork, all sorts of the oddity style investments that you might actually see in the SMSF space. And so I think choice is probably the greatest benefit of self-managed super, given that with choice obviously comes responsibilities, and sound a little bit like Spider-Man there with that sort of statement. But the whole idea that you're not beholden to one set of rules or one set of an investment vehicle, and can broaden your horizons a bit.
And probably engagement would fall into that as well. If people are really, actively engaged in their super versus just, one of those things that.
Yeah, I hate it when someone else comes up with the better answer than me in that regard.
No, I'm just feeding off what you're saying.
Yeah, but look, and the irony is that years ago when I first started doing presentations around the concept of whether a self-managed super fund is right for people, and this was really around that whole simpler super reform, which was never simpler back in 2007, but that sort of concept where always used to talk about the pros and cons, and I've always been mindful of making sure that you highlight the cons of self-managed super as much as the pros. But when I was working side by side with some colleagues at that point in time, and engagement was actually the word that we said, let's be a little bit different, and let's say that one of the real reasons that people get into self-managed super fund is that it gives them something to do in the superannuation space, and it gives them a greater appreciation for what the superannuation system incorporates. And so engagement, can I take my answer back and say engagement, but it's absolutely a critical issue in our space.
Yeah, I think when people do that and they get engaged, it gives them a bit of a status thing as well, and to be able to get down to the bowls club or something and tell their friends about how they're the investment manager of their fund.
Yeah, and look, and you're absolutely spot on. And I think then if I just jump back to my concept about the pros and cons, is that engagement, that choice, and that control, all those sort of three key words, and they all lead to things like taxation benefits and other elements where the tax rules aren't any different for self-managed super, but you control when the tax events happen and those sorts of elements. But the flip side of that is the responsibility is obviously linked to your capacity to undertake and perform certain duties, and so with the inevitability that we get older, therefore how much responsibility do you want beyond a certain point in time in your life, and I actually still think to this day that it's the one area that the self-managed super industry hasn't really nailed down, and that is there's a lot of conversation, always has been a lot of conversation around elder abuse and other elements, but also mental health and diminishing health and invalidity. Those sorts of areas that the SMSF environment doesn't actually sit well within, because you're often finding you're moving your trustee powers over to someone else via enduring powers of attorney and the like, and then then it's a different mind controlling your fund. It's not yours, and I think that we have this small superannuation fund alternative, which is the small APRA fund, and it's an area that I've often been passionate about. We used to do some administration of small APRA funds in the past life, and it's an area that I think is underutilised because the regulator treats self-managed and small APRA quite different, and that's because of the APRA concept, and so I think with all of those other pros of self-managed super, that end of life and that part of the industry still has its difficulties that we have to try and overcome, and that's where the advice piece is hugely critical. And when I talk about the is an SMSF right for you concept, day one, we say not what's the name of your self-managed super fund, not what are you going to call it, but have you got an enduring power of attorney and have you got a will in place, because you don't know what's happening to you when, and you need to address these issues from the very moment you start talking about self-managed super.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's definitely a skill in being a trustee, especially for somebody else has an enduring power of attorney or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
There is definitely a lot of work that goes into that, and you do actually have to think very, very differently as somebody representing somebody else versus what you would do yourself. So to be able to remove emotion or remove yourself from that situation and put yourself in a different situation is a skill. And I think, too often it's just, they put the kids in charge, and then that's when something can go wrong.
Yeah, correct.
Very good. So tell us about before obviously we've just gone through the new financial year and things that, change for you as every time you go through a financial year. What were you helping with people with, post 30 June? Oh, sorry, pre-30 June.
Pre-30 June, yeah. So what we were sort of helping with mainly there in that regard was this whole idea, because we all got caught up a little bit in, as I said, super reform in theory happened in 2017, but it's been a constant change every year since 2017. And, the one thing that everyone had been waiting for was indexation. Now, indexation has occurred at 1 July. So we've now got new concessional and non-concessional caps, which gives us greater bring forward capacity from a non-concessional amount. We've also got a new transfer balance cap. So we had the increase from 1.6 to 1.7. But with that comes this whole concept that, not all things are treated equal. And so not everybody gets a new personal transfer balance cap. Not everybody gets new non-concessional contribution caps because they've exhausted their capacity to make non-concessional contributions. And so it was a little bit about the conversation pre-30 June was a good one for leading people into the future of planning that as well, which is this concept that the super environment now is very much a hindsight versus foresight kind of conversation in that contribution strategies are very much driven by hindsight, because everything is based on your total super balance at the previous 30th of June. And so, where you sat at the previous 30 June gave you the capacity to make decisions in the lead up to the next 30 June with your ability to make contributions. And probably nowhere was that more evident than 30 June 2021, where ultimately we saw a situation where 30 June 2020 was coming off the back of the initial market crash of COVID-19. And so a lot of self-managed super fund balances were down. Well, a lot of them dropped 30% in March 2020, and then there was maybe a slight recovery, but not significant. But then come 30 June 2021, some of those portfolios had grown 25, 30%. Some parts of the market were up 40%. And that's quite a significant growth, particularly for those sort of higher balance members who at 30 June 2020 might have been thinking, okay, well we'll be able to make contributions in a couple of years' time, and we know there's going to be some indexation, so we'll wait for that indexation and then we'll make our contributions. But all of a sudden they're sitting at $1.4 million at 2020. And then they've got 1.7 million at 2021 because of the growth, and they're out of the game. They're out of the contribution game. So the way that the thing that I was focusing on a lot before 30th of June was what can you do before you get to this point? And I think it's a message for moving forward, is that if we're saying that every decade we get a big market event that creates sort of a lot of losses, that we shouldn't be focusing necessarily on the downturn in the market. We should be focusing on the opportunities that creates with lower balances at a point in time. Now, not all those opportunities are great for everybody, particularly if you've just retired and you're looking at income streams and things. So you've got that side of it. But then the foresight part is is the pension side of things, and that is that growth is probably the enemy of pensions from the point of view is that it requires you to draw higher incomes down when you might not necessarily want to. Yes, we've got the 50% minimum pension reduction again this year, but we've also got a transfer balance cap of $1.7 million, and if you've got that growth that for those clients that are lucky enough to have more than that, well then they've got to make decisions about money sitting in accumulation versus money sitting in a pension account, and then what that means from an investment strategy point of view and all those other sorts of things. So the focus sort of pre-30 June was how do you deal with the known issues, like how do you deal with, from an advice piece, dealing with what you know about versus speculating on what you think might be happening in the future, because we've had two budgets relatively close together and all those other sorts of things, and the proposals for 30 June 2022 would certainly, I have no doubt, would have been clouding some people's sort of minds in the lead up to 30 June 21, because they go, well, hang on, this is what's going to happen in a year's time, potentially. Do we wait? Do we wait for indexation? Do we do all these sorts of things? Well, we've seen so much change in the last 4 years that often, do you wait for $30,000 worth of a bring forward indexed cap and miss out on the opportunity to put in 300,000, or do you act now and go, by acting now, I might have taken a little hit, but I've taken a bigger benefit in the long term. And that's the game we play, that strategically you're only ever going to be right at the time that you write it, and then it could impact and could be changed. It's like the one thing, this 2022 stuff, and we might talk about it a little bit, like the legacy pensions and the removal or the amnesty that is proposed to come in, potentially in a year's time, where people will have a 2-year window to wind up these pensions. Now, it doesn't impact that many self-managed super funds in the grand scheme of things. But I was at the coalface back in the early 2000s of setting these sorts of things up, and the reason people set these up were for legitimate reasons based on the law at the time. And now they've become the scourge of the industry since 2007. But you can only act on what the law allows you to act on at any given point. And so when we talked before about technology catching up and things like that, it's the law catching up with things as well. So the other thing I was grappling with sort of pre-30 June is I'm getting questions almost daily and about things like cryptocurrency and non-fungible tokens, and people will say, Tim, what's your opinion on non-fungible tokens? I'll say, well, let me firstly Google what non-fungible tokens are, and then I'll give you an opinion about it. And
it's when people say, oh, what do you think about NFTs? And you go, let me just Google NFT.
That's right. Yeah, I know a lot about NFI, but NFTs was an interesting one, and I've been doing a couple of presentations on this space, and it's a fascinating area because, I think blockchain technology gives us one thing, and that sounds like I know what I'm talking about when I can just say what it's called straight away, but blockchain gives us this great capacity to track transactions and absolutely identify ownership with regards to separation of assets and some of those critical issues for self-managed superannuation funds. But given that a lot of this stuff was introduced to avoid centralization and to avoid government regulation and then to incorporate them from an investment point of view in the most highly regulated environment, it's the clashing of two clans in many respects. And the whole NFT stuff, when we're talking about digital art, you can guarantee that there are self-managed super funds already trying to engage in these sorts of investments, and the regulations just don't exist. We have collectible and personal use asset rules which talk about storage, which talk about insurance, which talk about displaying and all those sorts of things. Well, how do you regulate USBs? And that's a really that's a really sort of archaic way of looking at it. But to identify blockchain's one thing, to then talk about the actual piece that the investment is in, which is this digital artwork or whatever. And I'm not sure if you saw that one recently. There was the Italian artist who sold nothing. Like, he sold a sculpture of nothing. It was in a 1.5 by 1.5 meter square, and somebody paid $23,000 for effectively an invisible sculpture. Now, I mean, I've been making invisible sculptures all my life, but no one's willing to pay for it.
You have to start marketing them.
Exactly.
Turns out people do pay for them.
Well, this is it. But how do we regulate this sort of stuff? Because what we're doing is we're seeing that movement in our industry from the older generation of self-managed super fund members to the new members are invariably younger members, and their life skills are driven more by the internet, by digital investments, and those sorts of things. And the regulation often just takes too long. Regulations take too long to catch up, and therefore it's hugely problematic for fund auditors and those sorts of parties and advisors. Anyone that you can't advise on this stuff. So.
Well, it is interesting that financial advisors in most cases can't advise on
Correct.
it, and that's often due to a PI issue or more than anything. A lot of PI insurers are removing themselves to say you can't mention it. But it is a very interesting thing where you do have trustees that, as you mentioned, have broadness of choice, but yet those new technology type assets that are coming out there that are tradable. Yep. Purchasable and saleable. You can use real money. You don't need to use crypto to buy them. You can actually purchase them with real money. And digital art is one of those very interesting things, which is the NFTs. Often it's the sale of a individual piece of digital art. Obviously, when we're used to the difference between an NFT and normal digital art is I can pretty much share an image on the internet. You can share it, then 1,000 other people can share it, and we can all have a copy of this art. Whereas this just allows us to say, no, I'm the actual owner of the art, and it belongs to me. But you're absolutely right. We do have rules around display. It's going to be a hard one to police, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, I think so, and I think probably importantly in that is that the balancing the I own it piece with but does that satisfy the sole purpose test? Like, how is that providing for your retirement? So that's a self-gratification issue, and I thought one of the great things you said before when we were talking about the whole enduring powers of attorney and things was the taking emotion out of the decision making. Well, as trustees, we technically have to take emotion out of the decision making process for creating an investment strategy, and effectively the sole purpose test and previous rulings by the ATO on that says that the decision ultimately can't be emotive. It has to be driven by how does this investment provide for my retirement, and if in any way, shape or form the decision is made based on any personal enjoyment that you get out of it, then largely you're in breach of the sole purpose test. Yes, there are incidental benefits and those sorts of things, and so it's a real minefield with regards to where the regulator will come out with this area and deal with it.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And I think it's something that they have to address, though, because it's definitely a thing. It's definitely around, and it's something that they're going to have to put some words to paper around, because otherwise people will, like you said, if there's no words on the paper, then people will start purchasing these items and putting them in the fund, and then working out later that maybe that might not be a great thing. Yeah. Speaking of super reform and all the information that has come out over the past 4 years and happening over the next 5 or 6 years to come, and a good decade worth of tinkering around the edges. Tell us what you think might be coming down the track, or what you think maybe should coming down the track.
Yeah, well, look, I think I guess probably where I'd start with that is with the budget announcement stuff and perhaps sort of where I see that landing in a post 2022 environment, because the interesting thing about this recent federal budget was it's kind of the first time that that I've seen where the government have said, here's these measures, and we assume that they're going to start from the 1st of July 2022. That's effectively what they said. And that's a reflection of where we've been for the last decade. You know, we've had 10 years of I guess, government instability with regards to, you know, who's leading the country at any given point in time. And what that's meant is that legislation has largely taken a lot longer to pass through. And you know, the changes to the bring forward provisions was a classic example of that. You know, introduced as a federal budget announcement, but then took well and truly in excess of 12 months to come into law and things on a measure which, in its release, was supported by the opposition. So, you know, if measures that are supported by the opposition take in excess of 12 months, then when you've got dissent, then, you know, measures invariably don't get through, or they go through in significantly changed manner. So when we start to talk about some of the 2022 proposals around downsizing contributions and lowering the age limit there, and things like the First Home Super Saver scheme, and enhancing how much you can contribute from a deposit, or how much you can withdraw from a deposit point of view. So the changes of that going from 30,000 to 50,000, you know, it makes me contemplate just how successful those measures will become if you then reflect on what we've just talked about, which is that there's been so much regulatory change. Because, you know, if the First Home Super Saver scheme, for example, is currently $30,000 that you can withdraw plus your earnings, and the most you can contribute is $15,000 a year. So you've got your caps, but the most that you can attribute to the First Home Super Saver is $15,000 a year. So, you know, simple math says, well, that takes you 2 years to contribute and take your money out. But if that limit's increasing to 50,000, and, you know, everyone knows that a $50,000 deposit on a home is better than a $30,000 deposit on a home. But if you're doing that in super and you're still limited to only putting 15,000 in a year, then all of a sudden a 2-year strategy becomes a 4-year strategy if you want to maximize it. And what else changes in that 4-year period? You know, we're talking about benefits being preserved in the super environment, and lots of life circumstances can change in a 4-year period. And so then if we're talking about younger generations making contributions to buy a house and they're putting it into super, and circumstances change, well, then they preserve their benefits until, you know, post age 60. And what's not to suggest, probably to nail down a key concern of mine from your original question, is what's not to suggest in a world where pension age is increased to 67, and the work test has gone from, or not needing to satisfy the work test has gone from 65 to 67 and potentially to 74, where you've got the ability to contribute. What's to suggest that our condition of release from a retirement point of view doesn't move from 65 to 67. So accessibility. So that's always in the back of my mind a problem, is accessibility to superannuation benefits. And of course, if we do see that move to 67, particularly with the age pension moving to 67, the fact that preservation ends at 60 in theory, with regards to when you can actually satisfy the retirement condition of release from age 60 by making a declaration of no intention to re-enter the workforce, those sorts of things, then we've got this 7-year window where people will have accessibility to their superannuation, which to me then exposes the age pension system a lot more, because people are potentially drawing down, without necessarily a great appreciation of life expectancy and other sorts of elements. This window is created where, superannuation serve one purpose. We're all terrible savers, and so we have super to preserve our benefits so we don't spend that money. And most of us look for ways to access that superannuation money, and so how do we satisfy the definition of retirement? What can we do to get access to this money? So, you take those policy announcements for 2022 and you expand on them to think of the extension of that, and you go, okay, well, where's the change to preservation? At what point in time do we see the removal of tax-free, tax-exempt income over the age of 60? When does transition to retirement income streams cease, or when do they change the age that comes into effect? When do we lose the ECPI deduction in its entirety, and where do we go from a tax-free pension environment to a taxable environment, because there's more people in pension than there are in accumulation, and so and this comes back to that one comment we made before. There's no objective of superannuation, and so without that objective, it makes it rife for bad policy decisions, and that's my fear.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it depends on who's writing the policies and what some of their objectives are. So you're absolutely right. With no doubt there's going to be lots of ripples still to come, a lot of change on its way, and so I guess for someone like yourself, there's always going to be plenty of work to do. That's for sure.
Well, this is it. I mean, I talk about a lot of instability, but I also got to say I love a lot of instability, because it keeps my mind fresh with regards to there's that moment of panic where you drive home on a federal budget night or whatever, and all of a sudden you hear that they've changed the entire superannuation system, and so you realise that you're not going to sleep for the next 24 hours. But deep down, you kind of also hope for that, so you've got a job to go back to the next day.
Fantastic. Now, you're obviously head of education at SuperGuardian. Tell us about what else SuperGuardian does. Yeah,
so look, SuperGuardian primarily is a self-managed super fund administrator. So we provide the administration service for SMSFs. We have effectively, I wouldn't say two offerings necessarily, because admin is admin, but we do service clients directly, but largely our referral source is SMSF professionals, so financial advisors, accountants, fund managers, stockbrokers who have SMSF clients and are looking for somebody to do the administration service. So the administration service broadly incorporates the compliance element that we've touched on throughout the podcast, where ensuring that the funds are meeting their legislative obligations, but also in addition, because from an audit point of view, there's two obligations. One is the compliance audit to make sure you're satisfying the rules, and the other one is the financial audit, which is that you're reporting all the contributions and allocating them to the right place, making sure your franking credits match up, all your dividends have been received, all of the expenses are appropriately attributable to the right place, all that sort of stuff. So SMSF admin incorporates all of the annual requirements for the fund, and then pumps it out in respect of set of financial statements. So largely our day-to-day business and core business is the collection of the data, the transactional data for self-managed super funds, turning that into reportable data from a regulatory point of view, and a lot of communication via both the intermediaries, so the SMSF professionals and the trustees, with regards to confirming that pension payments are made by the 30th of June, making sure that contributions are allocated to the correct member, ensuring that assets are held in the correct names, and so all of those sorts of other elements. So the broad compliance administration is the role that we play here at SuperGuardian.
Fantastic. Sounds like it's around just having advisors' backs.
Correct. It is ultimately, part of that relationship. It's part of that concept that we go back to from the early part of this discussion about the management part and who is performing all the various roles for the fund. We're playing that key role in bringing everything together from all the parties. So from the trustee to their professional, we're tying it all together to present the material to the next part of the chain, which is the auditor, and then ultimately lodging the return as a tax agent with the regulator.
Yeah. And did you say you'd been around 28 years earlier on?
I guess I alluded to that by suggesting that 1994 was roughly my start date in the superannuation industry, and 99 was when I started in the excluded and the SMSF space. So I mean, it was hard to do that as like a 5-year-old at the time, but it's been a while. It's been a journey.
How long has SuperGuardian been looking after clients for?
So SuperGuardian themselves have been around for just in excess of 18 years. So it's sort of probably, although it was probably 18 years when I started here a couple of years ago, so it's probably getting pretty close to 20 years in existence as well. So certainly they've been a big part of this industry in the admin space for a good portion of the existence of the industry.
Fantastic. So, Tim, if somebody wants to continue the conversation or find out more, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, the best way to do it is if you wanted to jump on to our website, superguardian.com.au, you get a couple of options there, or more than a couple of options. But if people want to delve in to find out about a little bit about our admin, then they can do that from the site. But also, from what I offer on a daily basis, we've got the capacity for people to sign up to receive technical updates and access to my regular webinars and broader events. It's been difficult for someone like me who, Fraser, as you can tell, I like to talk. I've been like a caged animal. I don't like to use that term, but I've been like a caged animal the last 12 months because I haven't been able to get out there face to face and do what I really enjoy doing. So, we tinkered a little bit with some live events in March. We've had to delay some June ones, obviously with things happening around the country. So we've delayed them till September in the hope that we can open up. But the capacity to sign up and hear about what we're doing next and get our recent tech updates, and that is all possible through our website.
Fantastic. So if you're interested in looking at getting some more information from Tim or from SuperGuardian, you can jump on their website and sign up for their updates, or even attend an event in person, hopefully one day.
Fingers crossed.
Tim, thanks so much for coming on and chatting to us today. Really appreciate giving some time.
No worries, Fraser. Really, really love it. As you can tell, I enjoy the conversation piece around self-managed, so always take up the opportunity to have a conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim.
No worries. Thank you.